Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth panel installment of the 2020 revision series. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Gerald Hankerson, the outreach coordinator at CARE Chicago, and really excited. The particular topic is very timely: elections, pandemics, and voter suppression. So much is at stake, of course, looming within less than 40 days to election day. But elections are already underway. People dealing with mail-in ballots, also looking at the poll sites opening in various jurisdictions throughout our state. But most importantly is really clarifying what is going on with our elections given the pandemics of coronavirus and other social inequities pending. So as always within the series, a few things before we get officially underway. First and foremost, as a reminder about the census. The partners first, of course. With the partners, we are very excited that we now have expanded partnerships. So alongside CARE Chicago, our trusted friends at the Illinois Coalition, Muslim Civic Coalition, thanks as always. We also have some additional friends, the Illinois Coalition Immigrant and Refugee Rights, or ICER. We also have the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and those two organizations have featured panelists today, so you get to meet them shortly. We also have our friends at the Midwest Muslim United Student Association, MUSA. So thank you guys as well. And my alma mater, the University of Illinois at Chicago's Muslim Student Association as well. Thank you, friends. And of course, be sure to tune in to other events, and we'll talk about that shortly. With that, I want to bring in my colleague, Wali Sakari, to discuss the upcoming census.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's good to see you all again. I'm back, and I got the same message, and it's more timely than ever that if you have not filled out your 2020 census, listen up, because it's the most important thing you're going to do until you vote, I suppose. But for those of you who don't know, 2020 census, this is how we count our population. We found out who's in the country and where they are and where resources and representation ought to be allocated. So please fill out your census. It's how we make sure that we have our per capita federal funding for the next 10 years. So for example, within the next 10 years, if we come across another unforeseen catastrophe or pandemic or disaster or whatever, we will only be funded by the federal government in relief for people who are counted. And of course, we know that there are a lot more people who live here than the people who are counted. So please do your part. If you haven't done it, just go straight up right now. Go to my2020census.gov. Come back in 5 minutes when you're done. You won't miss that much, but this is the most important thing you're gonna do. We're here, we're talking about elections, and the census, for example, will decide what the electoral districts are going to look like next year. And that will continue for a decade. It's going to decide how many electoral votes Illinois itself is allocated. So the census will affect every element of funding and representation for the next decade. So again, it's my2020census.gov. It takes like 5 minutes or maybe 10 if you have a huge family, but it matters. And it's for everybody, whether or not you're above the age of 18, whether or not you're a registered voter, or if you're a citizen, or if you're undocumented, doesn't matter. You live here, you count. Go to my2020census.gov for anybody who still has not yet done it. So yeah, thank you very much, Gerald. I'll get off my soapbox now. It's always good to remind everyone here. Finally, just a quick reminder for the students. If you have not counted yourself on campus. So for example, with the pandemic, as we all know, a lot of students who normally would have been living in a college town or near their school or in any sort of off-campus housing, please listen up, because you might have left before April 1st. And so on April 1st, if you were counted in the census or you wanted to count yourself, please count yourself where you would have been had there been no pandemic, as opposed to where the reality shook up now. So if you look on the screen, we got just a brief announcement. If you lived in official on-campus university housing, you were counted, in quarters enumeration. You've already been counted. If you commuted from home, then you can count yourself at home. But if you lived in any sort of off-campus apartment or housing near your school that you ended up leaving before April 1st, please make sure you're counted there. It's okay that to be double counted if you're changing your address and being more specific as to where you actually were. So please, that's just my announcement. These neighborhoods and these college towns really depend on you counting there in order for them to, receive the funding and representation that they need. So that being said, I will turn it back over to Brother Gerald to introduce us to our itinerary for today.
All right, thanks, Waleed. So as always, we look forward to sharing insights with our wonderful panelists. And this time around, we have a guest moderator who's actually a longtime friend of not only myself and some of the other panelists here today, but also alongside one of the main co-sponsors, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. That is Yusuf Adal, who is director of organizing at the coalition, as we call it, where he's primarily responsible for field organizing and operations management, community relations, and along many other projects throughout the region as it pertains to GOTV campaigns. And with over 5 years of experience in community development and organizing, he works with diverse communities and community leaders throughout the state to mobilize, coordinate, and encourage civic engagement along with key policy issue areas. My brother Yusuf, the floor is now yours to definitely lead this insightful and much needed conversation. Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening, and I hope everyone's having as best of a time that we can have. I'm really, it's a privilege to be here and to be, moderating this conversation. It's really going to be an exciting conversation in terms of what you see before you right now. It's a little bit about what we'll be discussing. And so again, I think with respect to our conversation today, it's going to be split between two components, two parts. The first is understanding or knowing your voting rights, followed by diving a little deeper into voter motivation, mobilization, and turnout. And then, of course, we will have a segment where we can refer to your questions. And so please, if you do at any moment, feel free to add them to the chat box or comment and on the live feed, and we will make sure to get to those at that respective time. But I think without further ado, I want to be able to introduce some of the great panelists and friends around the table who we will be talking with today. And so the first, Ami Ganhi, she's actually a senior counsel and works to reduce barriers to voting and improve civic participation, especially in communities of color and low-income communities. Ami's experience includes leading statewide voter protections for 2016 and the 2018 elections, partnering with community members in the criminal justice system, and expanding voter access. Advocating for communities of color during Illinois redistricting, as we mentioned earlier, alongside with advising local election boards as they implement their first Hindi ballots in the country. She is a close friend to the community as she was the previous executive director for South Asian American Policy Research Institute. And then prior to that, she also was a legal director of close friends of ours at the Asian American Investing Justice. So I'm extremely excited to have you. And then the other two here that we also have, really excited to be part of this conversation. We have Bassem Khawad. Bassem also needs no introductions. He's a great friend and the political director at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, or ICER, a statewide coalition dedicated to really protecting the rights of immigrants and refugees to full and equal participation in the civic, cultural, social, and political life of our diverse society. Bassem's background includes community and political organizing with the Arab and immigrant communities in the southwest suburbs in Chicago and across the US. Over the years, he served as the national campaign coordinator for the campaign on Take on Hate and organized with the American Federation of Teachers in Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. So Bassem, extremely happy to have you. And alongside, without ado, is also State Senator Selena Villanueva, also a friend, and I feel like we have the whole ICER family here. But also born and raised in Little Village, Selena is currently our state senator in the 11th district. She's been organizing and advocating for a community as a teenager and is committed to building immigrant power, developing young leaders, and really expanding voting rights and engaging immigrant communities and allies. During her time at ICER, Selena organized her communities to pressure lawmakers to pass online same-day automatic voter registration, all of which are now law. There also, she ran the largest immigrant civic engagement program in the state, registering over 200,000 new Americans. And prior to that, she also worked as the director of organizing for Chicago Votes. She was prior to being state senator. She was in 2018. She was appointed to the Illinois House of Representatives, and we're really excited to be able to have her here on with us today as well. And so again, in terms of again, we have three amazing panelists, and we're really excited to dive straight into the conversation. Again, if you have questions, please make sure that you share them on the chat. But just know that the recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube and on Facebook. Great, so let's get to it. In part one here, Ami, how are you doing?
Good, thank you so much for having me. It's amazing to be here in such great company. So thank you.
Yeah, no, we're excited to be able to talk to you because as you can imagine, there's a lot going on, especially when it comes to elections. And, you know, when we're talking about know your voting rights, can you share a little bit about what that is or means?
Absolutely. So again, I'm Ami Gandhi, an attorney with Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And we want all eligible voters in Illinois to feel comfortable voting in the way that feels safe for them, in the way that feels healthy for them, and to get any questions addressed ahead of time so that they're in a position to make a plan of how they want to vote. And that's a message you'll be hearing from all of us tonight. It's certainly something that not just my organization has been encouraging to community members, but also our nonpartisan Just Democracy Illinois coalition that a lot of us are involved with. And we just want to make sure that people have all of the information available to them, and also to not feel like they have to memorize everything about their voting rights. If people have questions at any point, questions that are big or small, you know, we are available for sure. Our election protection hotline is 866-OUR-VOTE. That's 866-OUR-VOTE. And we have other lines for community members who speak languages other than English. So we'll be sharing more about that in today's program as well. But it's an incredibly difficult time as a voter in the United States. And that's the case even in Illinois. And we've seen, unfortunately, because of rhetoric and because of policies and rules that are restricting voters on the national and local level, the effect is that many voters are scared and confused and disenfranchised. And I don't want to be too bleak about it, because there are many ways that we as community members can overcome those barriers. And I hope that we all can do that together. But I also understand where people are coming from, that with not only the news headlines, but also just the practical changes that have been made to our election system, especially during this pandemic, it's made it especially hard for people to figure out how they're going to exercise their right to vote.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great point. And I think, you know, you talk a little bit about underrepresented and hard to access or hard to reach communities, especially those of color. And, you know, one of the things I know, and you know this, that, you know, earlier this summer, the state itself was able to expand, you know, some of the things in terms of the electoral processes and tools for communities right now. But I think in terms of what you're seeing, we'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, how this will impact voters, election volunteers, and even organizers.
We took a great step forward when Illinois passed into law emergency legislation earlier this year to expand voter access for the November election because of COVID, because of the public health crisis and how that affects the way that people can participate. So we now have expanded vote by mail in Illinois, and that's a great resource for all of us as voters and community members. But we also still have in-person access to the polls, both on election day and early voting. For some community members, we hear that either they can't vote by mail or they don't feel comfortable doing so. And so it's really important that we have an array of options for all of us individually and for the communities that we work with. And, a lot of us have communities who trust us and who are looking for advice about how to participate this election. So really want people to remember that they have options, and I would want everyone to feel comfortable in that as an Illinois voter. We should expect that there are public health precautions at in-person polling places, and that we have some specific ways that we can vote by mail by following the procedures on that front if people would like to participate that way. We're lucky that that vote by mail is not new in Illinois. We're fortunate that our state and local authorities have significant experience with administering vote by mail, and that includes election officials of both parties. If you look at kind of the composition of the clerks in different parts of the state, and it's good that we're not doing a grand experiment for the first time for this very important election. And we're also fortunate as community members and folks interested in policy and folks working with voters, we're fortunate that even though there are disruptions to the US Postal Service this year, there are still other ways that people can vote from a distance, vote at home or vote from a distance. For example, they can request a vote by mail ballot if they don't want to go to a crowded polling place, for example, but then they could return that completed ballot in a secure drop box in many jurisdictions, including many locations in the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County and other counties as well. And so, there are some creative ways that people can plan ahead of time and participate, even though the pandemic is so challenging. I know it won't be easy. I know it may take a few extra steps for people to plan and prepare, unfortunately, but we're glad that there are those options available.
Yeah, and I think, that's very important to know, because I think the whole concept of planning to vote, right? This is something that has been really unprecedented, and like a lot of people are newly adjusting to, I can imagine. And one of the things, the tools that people are still kind of trying to figure out is the vote by mail. And so for those that maybe are not completely sure what that is or what that looks like, what is exactly voting by mail?
Thank you. And I'm sorry I jumped ahead a bit. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah, no.
So in Illinois, all eligible voters have the right to vote by mail if that's how they would like to participate. In Illinois, we do have to request a vote by mail ballot. So we can't expect that one will automatically come to us, but we have to make that request. We also have to be registered to vote in order to have any kind of voting option, including vote by mail.
Right.
So once someone's registered to vote and they've affirmatively applied to vote by mail, they can get a ballot in the mail, a blank ballot in the mail, and then they should complete that at their own convenience, and then they can return it, the completed ballot, by mail or put it in a secure drop box. And those couple options are important this year, given that even though we are comfortable advising people, especially if they plan early, they can feel comfortable submitting a completed ballot via the US Postal Service. But if it's getting down to the wire, if it's right before the election, and we've all been hearing about the USPS delays and disruptions, certainly encourage people to use secure drop boxes instead, which are available in Chicago, suburban Cook County, and many other parts of the state.
Great. So just to reiterate, because I think you just hit on some great points, but for our viewers, I think, when you're voting by mail, because again, like you mentioned, there's a lot of information or misinformation out there and a lot of fear, rightly so, with everything that's going on. And so with respect to, if you're looking to do a voting by mail, right, and you're looking to, submit it, or even prior to that, applying for your application, what should folks know in terms of like some of the key dates? Just because, again, I think we're like 34, 33 days from Election Day. And so what should folks know today?
The main thing to know is to get the process going as soon as feasible if you would like to vote by mail. And that includes making sure your registration is up to date, your voter registration, and then applying for a vote by mail ballot. Many people have already applied for a vote by mail ballot. So it's great that a lot of people are planning ahead and have started that process. But don't worry, it's not too late. There's still quite a bit of time before people have faced the deadline for applying to vote by mail. And I know that Bassem and others will be talking about that as well. But I would just advise, if we can avoid doing it at the last minute, that would be helpful, just so that you all can rest easier and feel comfortable that, okay, I'm going to get my ballot in time, have enough time to fill it out, and then turn it back.
No, that's great information to know. I think, the other thing we've been hearing obviously from our communities are, what's next or what to expect. And so, what should folks be expecting when we arrive, at voting location as it relates to probably early voting and election day, given that, we are at in the post-COVID situation?
It's important to remember that in Illinois, we do have the option to vote in person for people who would rather do that. We hear pretty specifically from some community members. For example, we hear this with some of our partners in the Black community and some other communities, that there is not necessarily a familiarity or a trust relating to vote by mail. And so while we encourage people to vote by mail if they're comfortable doing so, if someone would rather go in person, that could certainly be the best option for them, especially if they go during early voting and try to go during a time when it's less crowded.
Right.
And we have a pretty expansive early voting period in Illinois, with early voting already having started in some places. In Chicago, for example, it will start tomorrow in a pretty limited way, but it will start tomorrow, and then it'll just get bigger and bigger and more spread out over the coming days and weeks. And so the Illinois Department of Public Health has issued guidelines and standards that they say should be in place for people's health and safety at in-person polling places, including early voting sites, but also election day sites. That's great. And it's great that that has been thought through more for November as compared to the March primary that, we may talk about a little bit. But still, we don't know exactly what's going to be happening in a practical way. So It's best if people can try to allow some time in case you get there and it's not exactly as clean or sanitized or distanced as you think it should be, or as we think it should be. Allow some time for that kind of advocacy that may need to happen to the election board or to the poll workers who are there, the election judges who are working there.
Right.
We may need to affirmatively ask for, access to sanitizer or a mask if you didn't bring one. We may need to ask for those things. Should they be there? Yes. Will they be there? We're not quite sure. So anyone should speak up if something's not right and if they're not feeling totally comfortable in that environment.
That's great. And I think you got to that second question there about, what to expect. I think, one of the things with respect to early voting is, so you mentioned the primaries, and in the primary, in March, I think it was really when that first huge wave happened in terms of COVID, and there was a lot going on, a lot of confusion. And so to your point around planning to vote, I mean, early voting may be new to a lot of, both seasoned voters and new voters. And so in terms of early voting itself, what days of the week are they usually open? And especially those who are looking to early vote, what can we share in terms of early voting locations? How can they find that information if they're looking to do it and planning to vote?
For voters who are in the city of Chicago, the best source of information for that would be the Chicago Board of Elections. If you live in the city of Chicago, don't think that you will get the election-related information from the Cook County Clerk's Office. The Cook County Clerk's Office governs specifically suburban Cook County locations. So either Chicago Board of Elections, or for folks in the Cook County suburbs, the Cook County Clerk's Office would be the best sources of information. And for those in other counties, you would typically be going to your county clerk's office to find out the specifics about locations and hours for early voting locations. Again, I want to say in Illinois, we have more expansive early voting than in many parts of the country. I know it doesn't solve everyone's issues. And
Right.
so we should advocate for more in terms of hours access or location access if that's what we as communities need. But there are a lot of options available for people. And if anyone's not sure, which government office am I supposed to call? What am I supposed to do? You can always call us at 866 Our Vote. No question is too silly or small. We're happy to walk anyone through that as well if they're just not exactly sure. Or they might call a government office and get a busy signal or not be able to get through. We're happy to help in that situation as well.
Great. No, this is great information. I think this is a great transition into our panel discussion. I want to thank you, Ami, for getting through those technicalities, because again, I can't begin to share how many times or how many conversations or things we've been hearing in the community with respect to some of this confusion, some of this frustration, and validly so, given the circumstances that we're in today. And so, Ami, thank you. And I'm excited to bring on everybody else here to the second part here of voter motivation, mobilizing, and turnout, really getting to the nitty-gritty stuff. And here with us, again, Bassem and Senator Selena Villanueva. Welcome to the both of you.
Also, for the purposes of this, I'm just Selena.
Okay.
I don't know how I feel about Bassem calling me senator. It's a little weird. The same thing with Ami, because I've known you guys for so long.
It's a small world here.
Yes.
Awesome. And so let's get right to it. I think we're all, you all have been working on this for such a long time, and I think this is a unprecedented time, and this is unlike any other election that I think we've had. And so getting right into this is understanding, and I think Ami shared a little bit about this, but there's a lot of issues that we're noticing between the racial disparities in terms of voter access, how it's going to be challenging certain communities maybe differently, and really exacerbating pre-existing challenges for some of these communities. And so the first question here, with respect to this, is how does this, and I mentioned racial disparities, how does this impact racial disparities? And I wanna first go to you, Selena, for this question.
So, it's really interesting because I was just on another thing and I was having to explain this. So my Senate district is on the southwest side of the city, and it also encompasses the southwest suburbs that are adjacent to the city. And I have the unfortunate distinction of representing a district that has 4 out of the top 5 COVID positive zip codes in the state of Illinois. And again, zip codes that are largely people of color, and particularly Latino, Latinx communities. And it's one of those things where this has always constantly been on my mind, because we know about this disparities. Disparities already existed before COVID. COVID didn't even, take the cover off of it. COVID just further emphasized the disparities that we already knew existed. And these were things that we had been having conversations about, for the longest of times. In the need to do the work in order to do the civic engagement work and the community education work. I think the thing that's coming out of it that, I think is really important is the self-awareness of the people in the community to say, this isn't right. This isn't actually okay, but this isn't right. This is not how things are supposed to be. Why is this even happening? And so I think, it is going to impact, and it has impacted voter access. I think that's one of the reasons why we fought so hard for so long before to try to remove the barriers. So in 2012, when online voter registration wasn't even a thing, or 2011 when it wasn't a thing, and understanding that that's exactly the way and the wave in which we were going to be going, and having that foresight and thinking about that. And the same thing with same-day registration. One of the things that I think has enabled us to be able to do our work and do it even better is that we are no longer bounded by the deadlines for voter registration, because even during early voting, even on election day, we can still get people in. Yeah. But we do have to think about, what IDs look like, because especially with low income folks and especially with immigrant communities, they might not all have the IDs that they need, the correct IDs, or, because they don't have the money to pay for the $20-$30 that it costs to get a state ID and a driver's license, or all of the above. So I mean, I think it's important to really reflect on the situation, because I think this is going to better improve the work that we do, to fix the laws in order to, again, continuously remove barriers. But again, also thinking about the fact that we've known all of this stuff before, and now it's a time of, okay, we got to do more work.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think, Bassem, I want to kick off the next one to you here, because I think Selena makes some really great points about, this is again, taking it's illuminating in terms of it has illuminated something that has been already systemically going on. And we want to make sure that we're a little understanding. And I know you, Bassem, you have long experience in terms of on the field, and currently, I think from conversations with you, it's having to adjust everything in terms of how engagement looks like in a post-COVID situation. And so, to the next question, does this create some new challenges? And when you're speaking, and how it affects some of these communities, and how is it with respect to these communities differently?
Yeah, first, Yusuf, thank you so much for having me. And it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with Selena.
It's the ICER family. It's the ICER family.
That's the flag. I owe Selena one thing, and I'm just going to put it out before, she gets to it. Selena's the reason why I'm doing this work today. I was part of the program that she ran in 2014 that I'm running today. And I could tell you one thing, when we talk about the challenges, I get the flashbacks of 2014. I was in the same building right now. I'm at Casa Michoacan prepping to go out on doors, knock on doors, do lit drops. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're seeing this year. That took a toll on our voter registration drives. Historically, on a general year, we've registered anywhere between 25 to 32,000 new voters. This year, we've set a goal of 10,000 new voters, and hopefully we can get there by the deadlines. But I think the biggest challenge is the lack of ability to be on doors.
Yeah.
Historically, the heart of outreach, the heart of the work that we do, consists of door knocking. But also, we shifted, and we know that we had to shift to meet the moment and ensure the safety of our community, which is our number one priority. Our community, our organizers, our volunteers. That brings up a lot of challenges. One thing, many of the communities that we're reaching out to are not properly listed their demographics, which makes it a challenge to do some targeted outreach. Another challenge that we've been seeing is, a lot of our community members are not attached to phone numbers. So how do we target many of our community members in the areas that we want to target them?
Yeah.
And then I think some of the biggest challenge is everyone is calling the same numbers.
Yeah.
It's been saturated. What we're seeing is the contact rates are dropping. So that means, we have to work on our scripts, make sure our scripts are catchy. But of course, we know the tools that work. We know that the relational tools, and relational is not a new concept, right? Relational is what organizing is. It's, people who live on a certain block are talking to their neighbors, talking to their friends, their family. So I think that's been kind of like some of the challenges. But also the last, thing is that the changes to this year's elections. There's a lot of confusion out there, a lot of misinformation that we're trying to kind of clear out with voters, which is taking toll. Overall, I think, for the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and our partners, we've learned a lot from our census operation and how we shifted to our digital outreach. So we have the tools. We know what it takes to get the work done. This will be our 9th, general cycle. We know it's just contacting voters. And, to get over these challenges, we're dropping literature at doors. We're calling, texting, and texting again. So that's what it's just going to take. Contact. Our digital outreach has been, improving since the pandemic. But overall, making sure that we get the information that we need to get to our community members about their rights and how they could vote safely in this upcoming election.
And Bassem, I think that's a perfect segue into this next thought, because when you're talking about there's certain barriers like how we communicate, right, or how we engage because of some of these restrictions, and leading into the next piece of like how it's exacerbated, right, some pre-existing challenges, and if anything, has taken it to new heights, which have been unprecedented. And so, Ami and Selena, I'd love to kind of weigh in on, have you weigh in on this. Is how more do you think it has exacerbated some of these pre-existing challenges, and in particularly with the communities that you engage with within your work?
I mean, you want to take a stab at that before?
Sure, I'll be happy to start. I'm going to call you Senator, though. I'll go ahead and start. So one important part of our civil rights work has been partnering with community members in the criminal legal system to expand voting rights. And with not being permitted to go into jail and prison for the last several months, it is hard for me. It is hard for my staff. We're used to being there. We're used to talking with people directly about issues. And now we make our best guess at it. And I was there, in the early part of this year, but that was the most valuable part of my work by far, because then what we're working on at the legal level, at the policy level, advocacy level, it's informed by real people and what they say. And now it's not. And so that has been challenging for sure, not to mention the intense and totally unacceptable public health conditions in our jails and prisons. So yes, voter access is important for community member, for example, for community members in pretrial detention and Cook County Jail, who fully have the right to vote on paper, but in a practical sense have faced a lot of barriers year in, year out, and how to exercise that right. Then if we're talking about returning citizens who are leaving Illinois prisons, again, fully have the right to vote, but many of them are disenfranchised by misinformation or by other kinds of deterrence from the system. And those are really important, but I also know that our community members are facing sometimes much more imminent issues even than voting right now. That's probably true for a lot of our communities. Mm-hmm. And so when we try to advocate, for example, for election authorities to prioritize returning citizens or citizens in pretrial detention, mm-hmm. who all are eligible to vote, the pandemic can be used as an excuse a lot of times, like to how do you really get through to that population when there's so many practical challenges to connect with and provide voter access to those communities. We as advocates should not let that stop us from insisting on what we think is needed, but it's hard for the voter resources to really make their way to some of the communities that are facing the most grave barriers right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ami. I think, that's a big one, because I think, especially when we think about the populations who are in jails right now, and, in terms of racial demographics, especially in Cook County Jail, a large number of folks that are, there are Black and brown. And what does that say in terms of who specifically, where the challenges and who are the challenges, put in front of. I think one of the other things that, is a concern of mine, is also language access, because you do have the right to be able to have someone help you with the ballot. But again, because of social distancing, and it's one thing in terms of vote by mail where, you can get, your ballot sent to you. But again, that's also another process, the digital divide and digital issues, particularly in low income communities, and whether people are even able to, complete the application, which was, again, another big thing and a conversation that we had, thinking about early voting, thinking about seniors and their, and folks that are immunocompromised. We have the disability community as well, that, it's making sure that all of, these folks, because everyone has the right, who is over the age of 18 or 18 and older and is a US citizen, have the right to vote. Mm-hmm. Regardless of your status, regardless of your racial background, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your gender, you have this right to vote. If you fill in this criteria, you shouldn't be discriminated against, or those ideas of those barriers should actually be thought of so that we can break them. But those are things that are constantly on my mind, is how are we making sure that people that need the additional support in their process, thinking about new Americans that might not have, the best, English, language skills, and still need a little additional support, because to be honest with you, a lot of the election stuff is it's legalese. Like, again, and I'm a state senator, and there are certain things that I got to look at and read a couple times and say, okay, does this really make sense? And I can only imagine, someone else who is not, this is not a part of their daily life, really thinking about it and having to say, okay, I don't understand this because this doesn't, like resemble something that is actually intuitive. So, I think those are some of the other, kind of conditions that I feel like have been further highlighted in all of this that we have to continuously keep an eye on.
Yeah, those are great points, Senator. And with respect to, I think you talked a little bit about the legal side of the work, and I know we heard from Bassem a little earlier with respect to some of the groundwork and some of the difficulties there. But I'd love to bring you in on this in terms of the legal aspect of this work, right? Because again, we are living in unprecedented times. What have you seen in terms of some of the biggest issues within your respective work due to COVID-19 and other things?
The biggest issue is definitely that the election period is so long that, right, we're already getting a lot of voter questions and issues ranging from confusion about some of these procedural hoops that you have to go through, like we've all been talking about, or more serious issues like voter intimidation that's occurring at some early voting locations. And so just to try to sustain for voters and organizers and advocates alike to try to sustain that work over such a long period of time is definitely challenging. And it may not end exactly on November 3rd either, because of there being a large number of vote by mail ballots that would take some time to be counted. And that doesn't mean anything is corrupt about our election system. It's just going to take some time. There's going to be a lot of information and moving parts coming in for some period of time that may not be completely resolved by November 3rd. And so that trying to sustain this work for all of us who are coming at it from a variety of different angles is definitely challenging. I have to say, we conduct voting rights work in Illinois and Indiana, and this is not to insult Indiana because it's my home state and my heart is there, but the Indiana voting system is very, very restrictive. It is very outdated. I can say this publicly, when there are public settings, when election authorities are speaking or considering changes to their system, it's just such a lack of understanding or care about what voters are going through during this pandemic. And so we have a system in Illinois that's far from perfect. You'll hear from me and the other advocates here about we want more even from our Illinois system. We need more, our communities need more. But when I see the difference of what comes in from an Indiana voter versus an Illinois voter, and just the hard fought victories by advocates and organizers here for these programs like election day registration and the list goes on, civics and prison law, all kinds of things that make a difference in people's lives in Illinois. It means we have a lot of potential here. And I know it's hard. It's hard and exhausting for everyone already, even this early in the election cycle. But I just see such a vast difference between the suppression that we see in states and communities very close by.
Yeah, thank you, Ami, for sharing that. I think the other thing that gets me thinking, because alongside with that and understanding, another component is like, again, kind of like digging deeper into the community engagement. And Bassem, I know you talked a little bit about this, but and then I know, Senator, you also mentioned with linguistic barriers, and especially now with COVID, that we've taken out the physical interaction. So Bassem, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, because I know when we're talking about engagement, it's both evolved, right? But then also it takes a lot more work, right? And so I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those hurdles.
Yeah, one thing I just want to re-emphasize a point that the senator made about our community members. And I just want to flag that despite the expansions of vote by mail, according to our numbers, and we've spoken to thousands of voters since July 10th, almost 63% of voters that we are speaking to are opting to vote in person. Because many of our community members, we're reaching out to low propensity voters, some of which have never voted before.
Yeah.
And just to flag, voting is so intimidating for new voters. It's a process that is very intimidating. And now there's many who have never voted before, and now they're having to vote in this new system, and they're having to make this choice, opting out to vote by mail and to vote in person. So I think that's going to be a real challenge that we will look deeply into all the way through elections and after elections. So when we talk about some of the disparities, here's another disparity that we should be considering. When it comes down to community engagement, one of the pieces that I want to start with is the way we are running our campaigns. Our offices are Zoom offices now, right? So how do we keep people motivated? How do we keep our volunteers motivated?
Yeah.
How do we recruit, and recruitment and retention is a big key in the work that we do. And I think that one has been kind of, shaky this year. But also when we talk about community engagement, I want to reemphasize the physical contact. Being able to talk to our community members one-on-one.
Yeah.
That one, it kind of is not, it's one of the hurdles that we're seeing this year. So I've been in this mask since 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I think, one of the hurdles with community engagement is the outreach that's been happening over the past few months.
Right.
Especially like with the census now that we're transitioning, which is exciting. So we have a lot of trained volunteers, a lot of trained phone bankers, but I feel like there has been a saturation of outreach.
Yeah.
And we're not the only ones outreaching to our community members, so we need to get creative. Like how do we reach them and what we reach them with. I've seen some of these, like the car caravans were pretty cool once upon a time. Now I'll tell you one thing, the next car caravan that passes by my house, I'm throwing, it kind of soda out the window. Like stop honking your horns, right? But then what are the other creative ways that we could continue to reach out to our communities? Is it digital? Do we engage our community, but then there's a digital gap?
Yeah.
So how are we targeting the certain, parts of our community? Those are all the hurdles, but I feel like we've been adapting pretty well.
Yeah.
There are kind of, we've adapted to kind of target the ethnic media, to target certain communities. We were introduced to geofencing and these different digital outreach methods.
Mm-hmm.
We're calling our community members, we're texting them, we're sending them mailers. So I feel like it's a combination of all that's going to get us to the, November 4th. But then, our work starts November 4th and beyond.
Yeah.
So not just think about the moment that we're in, but beyond how we're going to continue to engage our community. Also, one of the hurdles that we're going to see during COVID is the 2021 municipal elections. All the expansions that we've seen this year for this bill kind of sunset at the end of the year. Then what do we do for the municipal elections in 2021?
Yeah.
Without the expansion of vote by mail, how are we going to gather the signatures for some of the folks who are running? And let's not get into that.
Yeah.
But that's also going to impact some of our community members.
Yeah.
And then the way that the process works in the suburbs and the municipal elections. So we'll continue to monitor that. I know part of our work with the Just Democracy Coalition will look into the bill and kind of the rest of the advocates that will do post-election, but then also into the upcoming years to improve our system. And once again, the system is not perfect. This is what we're given. We're going to continue to work every day to expand voting rights, to make sure that every single person who wishes to vote can do so safely and kind of like, make it accessible.
Yeah, no, Bassam, and those are some powerful points. And I think, Senator, I really want to bring you into this next part because I know what Bassam shared in terms of the voter intimidation. I mean, it can be extremely intimidating to be a first-time voter or first time to just using some other tools you may be used to just go on election day in the past. And now the idea of having to do early voting or doing even vote by mail. Those are just like almost out of mind in terms of like what that actually looks like. And so what would you say to those Illinoisans who haven't voted by mail or early voted or voted early in the past? Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. I'll be honest, I'm actually one of those voters who has never voted by mail. I've always voted either early or voted on election day. Yeah. And so this will be the first year that I'm voting by mail. So, and part of the reason why I did it was obviously because of our work in the General Assembly to expand vote by mail, because I wanted to be able to tell people like, this is my experience, this is what I went through, and so that I can help you walk through that process. I've done early voting, and early voting isn't very much different than actually voting on election day, other than the fact that you're voting at a location. In Chicago, you're going to a specific ward location, like one location in the ward, but then again, you can actually go to any location in the city of Chicago during early voting. So it's actually a little bit more accessible for people that maybe have jobs, or they're, coming to and from places, and with different hours, like the super site downtown always tends to have longer hours than some of the early voting sites in the different wards and in the neighborhoods. But again, I try to, and what I do when I have people that ask me about the process, I try to be as transparent as possible and to really walk them through it. This was always like one of the things when I was at ICER and working with the program was, even talking to the boards of elections and saying, like, bring the machines out to the communities, show people, especially new voters, what they look like, because once you're familiar with, something like as a machine, it's less intimidating when you start seeing like, okay, this actually looks like an iPad, or this looks like, this or that. It becomes less and less intimidating, and people's in terms of their confidence in themselves goes up and up. So I think part of it is walking through people through the process, understanding that they have questions and they have concerns, and that those are all totally valid, and also being upfront about our own personal experiences with voting. I think I asked this question to a friend of mine, one of my neighbors, who is very in tune with judges, and so I asked him, I was like, can you send me the list of the people that are problematic? Because again, I am a state senator, and it's a lot of judges, and I don't know each and every one of them. I know several of them, but I don't know each and every one of them. And so it's like, okay, I know that I have to do the, my due diligence of educating myself and stuff like that. But for a lot of folks, they don't have the time, or they don't have, the ability to do so. And I tell them, like, I also rely on the information that I get from people that I trust, people that we have similar values and similar beliefs. And so again, humanizing the process and making it seem as less of like an intangible, and of like, because I think the heaviness of this responsibility of like, we have to vote, and it's like, yes, but it's not so scary that like the process in and of itself is this like big thing. It's like, this is what you do. You got to make sure that you complete the arrow, and make sure that you add like do this and that, make sure that it's in blue or black ink, like, and making it seem like things that they've done before, in just in different ways.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think sometimes we forget, right, that the folks that are normal, like you're talking about people who, it's not what you think maybe like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Your voter today is probably working 2 jobs, right? Is probably, there can be folks who are single mothers, or there can be folks who work 18-hour days. So the reality is that there's this real dilemma, because we're still catching up with like figuring that out, and being able to make sure that that we're working with the narratives today. And so this is a great segue into the next piece here, into like really diving into what happened in the primary. Now I know I was really well connected with respect to what happened with respect to COVID in the primary, and it really affected some of those early some polling locations on the 17th. Right. I know in suburban Cook, for example, you were looking at 48 to 52 locations. They didn't open until 2 p.m. And so the people that we're talking about, right, if they're looking at their day, and they normally traditionally go at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and they come to the door and know that, hey, it's not open. What's going on? Then what do we tell those people? And so I think, Ami, I want to really bring you into this, because this is something I think a lot of people are concerned about, with possibly a second wave in November, and hopefully we don't have to get there, but just anticipating for the worst. And also understanding that in the primary we did have a shortage of judges because of that first wave. Will we have, should we be looking at a shortage of election judges this upcoming election?
First of all, the good news is with incredible young people stepping up and a lot of the other initiatives that are underway, there's been this really meaningful effort towards recruiting more and more people to sign up to be paid election judges. So yes, there will be certain kinds of shortages because of some of the longtime election judges not feeling comfortable with that health risk right now. For example, people who are quite elderly or who have health issues and who decide not to be an election judge, but who we traditionally count on, may need to not be in that role for this time. But it's been really inspiring to see the work by Chicago Votes, among many other organizations who have been trying to really get our young people involved in serving as election judges. We also have some creative ideas that are coming from our state and government leaders, from election authorities, for example, trying to increase pay here and there modestly. It's still really hard work that people engage in for being an election judge. Also, another creative thing that election authorities are doing is having some universal sites available on election day. So similar to what our senator was talking about relating to early voting, where it's universal and you can go to a variety of different early voting locations in different neighborhoods. On election day, there will be some universal sites as well. That's an emergency provision in place for the November election only, but it is a good backup plan. It's not going to meet everyone's needs, but it is a good backup plan for some people where something went wrong at their assigned polling place. There will be another location that they can go to. And we get a lot of the problem calls. People typically call us at 866 our vote when something is going wrong. And we definitely had a flood of calls in March. We're continuing to get a lot of calls now. We'll get a lot on November 3rd. But I want to say that in many instances, we are able to reach a resolution for the voter. That's always our goal. We're not here to first say, let's go sue Chicago Board of Elections. Of course, that is not a good first thing to do. We really try to work to open up the lines of communication between the voter and the election authority. If there's any way something can get worked out by getting the polling place to be operational again before the voter leaves, or by calling the voter and saying, can you please come back? I know not everyone can, and I don't expect that they have to say yes, but we try to keep really good communication going with any problems that occur. And then as a result, most of the instances of those sorts of problems do get resolved such that someone can actually vote that day before it's too late. And so that's why I'm asking people to call us, not just so that we can file a lawsuit. I hope we never have to do that, but more so if we can help resolve something by opening up that communication, that's always going to be the better option.
Nami, and I think you shared something earlier on, is that the reality of election judges in the past, and I think in not all cases, but most cases, is that we've seen a very similar demographic, right? It's like your it's more senior, elderly folks who have been signing up to become election judges. And I think, you mentioned a little bit about this new measure. And so what is that new measure in terms of I know there's a new age requirement. What exactly is that for this election?
So we have long had young people serving as election judges in Illinois, but it is now expanded for this election, thanks to this emergency legislation enacted this year, SB 1863. So now there are more 16-year-olds who can be involved. There is an opening up of there's a lessening of the requirements so that someone's GPA, for example, doesn't stop them from a young person wanting to step up and serve as an election judge. I mean, what does a GPA have to do with whether someone can assist voters? So it's some of these changes that were sorely needed. And, I want to say that I don't take for granted that our young people are assisting in this way. I really appreciate that. Yep. There have been efforts to try to undermine that or suggest that young people are not ready and able to do that. The Cook County Republican Party filed suit to try to challenge this expanded vote by mail and young people serving as election judges. Our Just Democracy Nonpartisan Coalition filed an amicus brief, and the court agreed that we need young people right now to serve as election judges. We need expanded vote by mail. We need these provisions in place. This is not a conspiracy to try to make Democrats win. This is about fairness to all eligible voters.
And that's a great point. And I think, again, the reality of, like, again, maybe some of those who can be a little bit more sensitive to COVID. And I think the reality is that young people will play a huge role in this. And we want to continue to make sure that we're making it accessible and equitable in terms of the processes. Great. So then that really leads me to the next question, because I think we're having some really powerful conversations. And I know, Senator, I've asked this question of you, but I want to open this to the panel because I think because of COVID, we're interestingly moving into like a different space. And I guess the next question is, like, what does this mean for the future of elections, especially as it relates to the communities that we're talking about? Oh, there you go.
Sorry. Truthfully told, I mean, I think this means a lot. I think this is, one of those things where none of us ever anticipated COVID to happen. But now that it's here, we're all having to deal with it, like literally everyone. And, the truth of the matter, this, has pros and cons. I think Bassem brought up, in terms of what happens for candidates, because right now, in terms of the timeline, the likelihood of us actually seeing a vaccine is taking us into next year. And so what does that mean for, like what's happening right now? Because I think for certain municipalities, people are having to circulate at the moment, for municipal elections for next year. And then what does that mean for, like, again, the following year? So, we're having to, and we're already having those conversations on the state level. I can't speak for any other state. I can speak for the state of Illinois. We're having those conversations because we've been having those conversations in terms of what we were going to do for November. And we're going back to veto session, in November and December. And we're going to have to make some decisions because this is something that we're going to have to deal with. There were a lot of different aspects of election law that, there was only so much where we could cover and really take care of for this year. But, like one of the things that I think was significant that in the bill, and again, it's only for right now, is making Election Day a holiday. At least for schools. So schools, because of, stay at home, kids are not in schools. But a lot of polling locations have been transferred over to schools with additional money set in place in order to make sure that before voters come in, that, the schools are clean and they're safe for people to enter, but that they're also equally clean and safe for people to enter after Election Day. And so I think that's really going to have an impact. And so right now we're really writing history. The conversations that we're having and the conversations that are being had in different places, it's really going to set the precedent as to where we're going to go. And so right now, like it really is open. And I think this provides us an opportunity, especially for advocates that have been working on modernizing, election laws and voter laws. It provides an opportunity to have real conversations. Because again, we're in a positive situation where in the state of Illinois, Election Day registration is a real thing. And, for other states in this country, that's not a reality, and so I think, we are going to have to take the time to look at the different pieces of election law and, kind of like and take the examples and the experiences of both the primary and the general and really kind of work on addressing all of those issues as soon as we can possible. And so, again, I'm looking forward to working on this. I've already, I know that I have colleagues that are more than willing and ready to look at all of this and do some work on this because we don't know when the vaccine is going to come. We don't know when we're going to go back to quote unquote normal, which, means a bunch of different things because there's a lot going on in the world. But I do think that it's open right now. And it also is going to be imperative on us to make sure that the voices of our communities are heard in those conversations and that we demand to make sure that like the issues that we know are important to us are part of, whatever it is that we're coming up with.
Yeah, Bassem and Ami, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? If not, totally cool.
I just like one piece I want to add that, even though we mentioned, just want to go back a little bit. about kind of the, like how we kind of ease the restrictions on the young people to serve as judges.
Yeah.
I just want to flag that young people are not immune from contracting COVID-19. So like that's like one piece I feel like when this was pushed. So as of the advocates, going to continue to press to make sure that PPE is provided for the young people. Especially in the communities that are hardest hit.
Yep.
And one other piece, I think this is where the opportunity comes in for the young people to get civically engaged at a much younger age to see what the process is and what it looks like. Something that we're considering at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights is to actually recruit young judges who are bilingual in the different languages that our communities speak, to make sure that, those precincts where we know that, the different languages are spoken, that we have poll workers who are speaking those languages. And we will be kind of working with Chicago Votes on this in the upcoming days. But that's another ways to kind of look at the changes, push for the changes, and keep engaging our young people in the process.
Yeah, and Bassem, I think that's a great point because, I mean, the reality, I think the COVID does not discriminate, and it will hit everyone and anyone. And then you're talking about, and I know, I think the latest article I saw is that the highest the highest testing in terms of positive rates have been within the Latinx and African American community and communities of color, specifically because there has been, again, as was mentioned earlier, it has illuminated things that have been systematically oppressing folks for a number of years, and now we see it through COVID and play out in the communities in real time. And so I think like the other thing, and I know, I really want to, segue into and Bassem, I want to bring you back in on this, but because you're actively working on this at ICER, is that alongside with understanding the processing and the realities of our electoral or elections today, is also understanding what's at stake. And so looking at, some of the things that are happening right now, what are some of the things that you would say are major issues voters should be seriously considering when they're at the ballot box?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll be kind of honest and blunt about this. The two main, issues that we're talking to voters about, one is the Fair Tax Amendment and what it means to our communities. And the other piece is the pro-immigrant and pro-racial justice agenda and what that means for our communities. We know, and the senator could probably speak more and better about this than I can, but we are in a financial crisis. If we don't do something about it, it's going to be worse for the second half of the year, where we're going to see tax cuts to many programs. And then for the next year, we're going to see major cuts to some of the services. These are critical services that our communities, need. And this is where we come in with the pro-racial and pro-immigrant agenda. A pro-racial and pro-immigrant agenda means an investment in healthcare. The same agenda means abolishing ICE at the federal level, at the state level. The same pro-racial and pro-immigrant agenda means defunding the police. And we're not just saying defunding the police as a framework, right? We're saying defund the harmful institutions and reinvest in healthcare, reinvest in jobs, and reinvest in Black and Brown communities. If we are to learn anything from COVID-19, it's the disparities in all of these kind of sectors. Another major investment that we need to be talking about is funding our education system. I think that's another big piece, and this is all kind of part of the pro-immigrant, pro-racial justice agenda that we're talking to voters about this year. And like our plan, as we talk to voters about this, we recognize that not all of the issues that we spoke about are on the ballots, right? But this is where I think, some of our voters need to do a little bit of homework and vote for those who stand clear with our values, clear on our issues, whether it's at the federal level, state level, local level. I think we have a chance to make some noise, and a lot of noise in a very critical year.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll end it here before we get into the C4 partisan work, which I want to try to avoid as much as possible.
No, thank you, Bassem. And I think you made a really extremely important point, that there's so much at stake, and folks need to understand that it's not just simply going out to vote, but looking at your ballot and everything on it as seriously as possible, all the way through to the end. And I know I know you, Ambassador, you mentioned this, but Senator, I'd love to, ask you to expand a little bit, because the fair tax, also known as a graduated income tax, is something that people should be expecting to see on their ballot. I know there was a process, because the reality of our tax code is tied to our Constitution, right? And so it's a much different process than maybe what other states have to go through. It had to go through the legislature and now ultimately to a referendum. And so, Senator, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Oh, you're muted again, I think.
Yeah, I keep trying to mute myself because I have people that are working on my furnace in my house.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I have a baby in the background, so I try to mute myself too.
So I'm trying to not have people hear, all of the noises, which I think they're almost done. So what I can talk about is sort of the process that we took in terms of the legislator. People can make their own decisions in terms of how they're going to vote on that particular thing.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of what the legislator has the ability to do.
Right.
And this is one of the things, and I hate to put it as bluntly as this, but the legislator has the ability to be able to raise people's taxes. Mm-hmm. That's plain and simple. And so you might be seeing things that might be telling you all of a sudden it's like this or that. Like, we have that. That's part of, our responsibilities in terms of the law. However, what we're talking about in terms of the fair tax is giving people the opportunity to be able to voice their opinion and again, voice their vote on this very significant matter, that people have a say so, because again, it's written in our Constitution in the state of Illinois. What I urge people to do is to actually do their homework and to pay attention to who is providing you the information on the issue of the fair tax. That's what I can tell you. In terms of where I voted specifically, I voted in favor of passing the piece of legislation to be able to put this question on the ballot. And I did so because, again, I think it's important for me, especially on very significant issues that impact people, that they have a say-so over this. And so, again, I think people really need to look at the information as to who this would actually impact the most. And who would actually see whether or not their taxes are increased or not. And again, get your facts straight and make sure that they're coming from trusted sources of information. I'm the type of person that, every article that I read online, I got to make sure that I look at where it's actually really coming from, because the truth of the matter is that we've seen how, bots and, outside actors have tried to, influence our elections. And so we have to do our due diligence in order to make sure that we're getting actual information and again, facts, not misinformation. In terms of that, I think, again, there was, there's been a lot of conversations, and I think people should continue to have conversations around this. And again, I'm not trying to be vague. It's just there are certain lines in terms of both the organizations that are present on this call, and also because I'm here as a state senator, that I don't want to, misrepresent. And I also don't, again, as a state senator, want to influence people. People have the right to make their own choices and their own decisions. But again, get your facts and get them from trusted sources of information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a great point. Basem, did you have anything else to add to that, or Ami?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I just want to add, some of what we're telling the voters, right? Some of the facts that we're talking to the voters about is that, everyone who makes over $250,000 will see an increase to their taxes. 97% of Illinoisans are not going to see their taxes increase. And a lot of, a big chunk of the 97% will even see a decrease in their taxes, which I think this is really important to talk to voters about because of all the misinformation out there. There's a lot of misinformation. I know that, a mailer went out that explained both kind of talking points around the fair tax. I want to re-encourage, and reaffirm the senator's kind of talking points, is make sure that you check the facts, not the misconceptions out there, like how this will impact married couples or how this will impact senior citizens. Check the facts. because I think, we are one of 4 states who does not have a progressive tax system. And we are stuck living in the 70s when the entire country have moved to a modern system that's more equitable. And at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, we will continue to educate voters about the fair tax. We will continue, to push for more equity in our tax system.
Ami, I just wanted to bring you in. Is there, with respect to, again, what's at stake in generally, or even with respect to the topic, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I'd like to add a couple things. One is that, to me, one thing this discussion really underscores is the importance of language access to voting and very specific and thorough implementation of that, and our collective community's insistence that there should be no shortcuts when it comes to translations and interpretation access. Imagine many of our community members may be in the process of learning English. They may know some English. Usually we don't meet too many voters who know zero English, but they may be in the process of learning. And this is such an important issue for them to have accessible information about so they can make an informed choice. And that's true for all of us eligible voters, but it's particularly important to have accessible materials that people are entitled to under the law. And in terms of zooming out a little bit about other issues and offices at stake right now, I'll tell you that when we were conducting voter protection work in Cook County Jail in March, we heard a lot of interest, not just in the presidential primary, but a lot of interest in the state's attorney's race, a lot of interest in voting for judges. A lot of our judges are elected in Illinois, as other panelists have talked about. And there are resources out there. Various civic organizations have voter guides, and Ballot Ready is a helpful tool as well. Voteforjudges.org is a helpful tool as well. And so there is a space even for nonpartisan organizations and community members to get informed, as other panelists have talked about. And the impact of sometimes the down ballot races make a really big impact on community members' daily lives. And so appreciate that voters are trying to get educated about their options.
No, thank you for sharing that. Okay, great. So I think we're getting ready to close up here. We're going to go right into our next piece here, our Q&A. For this segment, of course, this is open to all of you, and so feel free to jump in. There's no buzzer, so just make sure you jump right in if you need to. The other thing is that for folks in the audience or tuning in, please, if you have questions, if you haven't already submitted one, you still have time, feel free to send it in into the chat box here or on the live feed. So the first question here that we have, and it's with respect to, I think a little bit about what we're talking about, is why vote if Illinois is not a swing state? And I know with respect to, I know we talked a little bit about what's at stake, but does anybody want to take just a quick jab at that?
This is the one that always blows my mind, because I think, and again, this is why civic education is so important, because the presidential election is not the only election on the ballot. There are, again, constitutional amendments, there are ballot initiatives that are on the ballot. There are state legislative races, whether it's for state senator, because we run in sort of different, segments, it's a third, and a third that run at different times, but your state representative runs every 2 years, the same thing as your congressperson. I think there's a Senate, a federal Senate election that's also happening, and while we might not have super local municipal elections until next year, someone else brought it up, I think Ami brought it up, in terms of state's attorneys. There's also judges. There are massive amounts of judges. And though most people think, oh, I'm never going to interact with the judge, it really doesn't matter. It really does matter.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the resources and the level of money that goes into incarcerating people and goes into our criminal justice system, and why we don't have enough money to go into other resources, you have to really think about that, because there's a direct impact in terms of the judges that we elect. you know, they're, you know, we really have to look at their vote, you know, the way that they have, again, in like sort of sentence people. And, you know, are they the type of judge that is actually really looking at the person and the situation in a case by case basis? Or are they somebody that's just saying, because you're Black and brown, you should be locked up?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really relevant. So, you know, like, while my people might say Illinois is in a swing state, at the end of the day, we can't take any of that for granted. You know, and we got to make sure that our voices get heard and that it's a very strong voice. But there is more than just the presidential election on the ballot.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. This actually is the next question here is what if I get my ballot in the mail, but I change my mind and want to vote in person?
I'll start and welcome other people to chime in as well. If anyone has questions about switching their mode of voting and wants to talk through it, please feel free to call us at 866-OUR-VOTE. Generally speaking, we would suggest that if people take their vote by mail ballot in with them, it will make things smoother. If they change their mind and decide they want to vote in person, it is the best practice to bring that ballot with them. But we definitely don't want eligible voters to be disenfranchised if something happens and they either forgot to bring the ballot with them or they hadn't gotten it in the mail yet. They requested it, they hadn't gotten it yet. That's why they went to vote in person. There could be all kinds of really understandable situations of why someone didn't do this ideal thing I'm suggesting of bringing it in with them. So we have insisted every single election, we've had to talk to election authorities and advocate to them that all eligible voters should have access to a ballot, even if they had to switch the way that they were voting. And, you know, we work with voters all the time. Voters are not trying to commit fraud. Voters are not trying to vote twice. People are trying to exercise their right to vote. If anything, sometimes when people experience confusion about these methods, they just decide, I don't know if I want to follow through with this. I'm just gonna leave it alone, or I feel intimidated by this process. So I would just really encourage people to ask any questions they have. They may have to speak up to the person working at the polls. They may have to get some help to navigate that process, and really encourage people to ask any questions that they might have.
So that there's just a follow-up question. Well, there's another question that's kind of almost like a follow-up to this, or just an expansion of what you just shared. But the next question is, I heard that it will take a while to count votes as it relates to the mail-in ballot. How long will it take in Illinois, or how long can we expect?
I'll start, but would ask other people to chime in as well. We, in Illinois, for up to 2 weeks after Election Day, there still could be counting and processing of vote by mail ballots. And sometimes that time is needed because of people who might have decided right around election time who they wanted to vote for, and might have fully complied with the rules and gotten their ballot postmarked by Election Day. They're not trying to vote late or commit fraud or anything, but they got something postmarked on time, but it may take some time for it to be received by the election authority. So we expect that for some of the candidates' races, we would know the results early, and some of them may take longer to process. And that doesn't mean anything shady is happening with our system. It could take some time to count every vote. And ultimately, that for the integrity of our election system, we hope that election authorities give it that time when needed. Now, I do want to say that, backing up a little bit, while we fully encourage people to take advantage of their voting rights, if they decide that they want to switch because of these different circumstances these days and the mail delays and everything, they want to switch the mode of how they're voting, that's understandable, and we're here to protect your right to do so. But if it's more of a matter of, I think I applied to vote by mail, but now I'm feeling nervous because of this drama in the news, and so I feel like I need to rush into my polling place, maybe hold up. If you haven't gone there yet and you want to talk through with your election authority or with an attorney, getting some help about, should I wait it out a little bit? Is my ballot on the way to me? You know, we would ask people, don't get worried to the point where you endanger your own health by going to a crowded polling place. Maybe you didn't need to do that. So again, it's part of making a plan. I want people to know about their rights, but also don't want someone to feel scared by the scare tactics in the news that they have to go and do something that they're not feeling safe and comfortable doing.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand the way that their election authority is operating. So I live in the city of Chicago, and throughout the process, in terms of applying for vote by mail, I got a confirmation via email, and then I got another email saying that they had processed the application, and then I got another email telling me that my ballot was on the way. And so I think one of the other things, again, you want to make sure that you know about, what the additional steps are that your election authority is taking. So in the city of Chicago, for people that might feel like, well, I don't want to necessarily put my vote by mail ballot in the mail because I don't know if it'll get back to election authorities, there are drop-off locations that are going to be available for people to be able to securely drop off their vote by mail application and not have to worry, because the only people that have access to it are the election authorities. And again, these are going to be in locations where, a lot of them might coincide with early voting locations. And again, you want to double check where the locations are, and the ones closest to you. You can usually, and you should be able to do that on, your Board of Elections website in your locality and where you live. And make sure that you have that, and that you read through everything. But I do think that it's important to note that, that's still an option for people to apply to vote by mail. But early voting is also very, very available for folks. So if you're, more concerned with, well, I don't want to be waiting in long lines, but I don't, feel like voting by mail, take advantage of early voting and go at a time, maybe during the day, where there isn't a long line of people. Instead of going at the very beginning or at the very end of the times at the early voting location, make sure that you go during a time that is available to you, during the week, or, during the time where there are going to be less people, because again, that's going to be there. And again, I think for a lot of early voting locations, they've been given sort of requirements to make sure that, there's enough space between people so that people are not necessarily next to each other, but that they're socially distant when they're voting. So it really is about kind of finding out the information, but also understanding that you do have rights and you do have options, particularly at this point in time, and that you have the right to exercise those options as well. In terms of just like the timing of it, truthfully, like there are some elections where, in previous times, even before this election, it's taken a while in order to get a final, decision in terms of who won, because there's recounts. Like, if you're in a very close race, like there are certain stipulations and certain election laws that where people can invoke the rights for a recount. And it's the same thing with sort of like absentee ballots in the previous, elections before this one, that people, even if you fill out an absentee ballot, like you still have a right to have your vote counted, and sometimes that takes a while longer. So at the end of the day, the taking of the time should not be something that freaks people out. It shouldn't be something that people say, oh my god, this is so unusual, because the truth of the matter is that it does happen. It's just not something that is literally over every TV and every radio station and in front of your face all the time, but it does happen. And so again, there are processes that are set in place in order to ensure that. Now, here's the thing that we do need to ensure is that our election authorities hold the elections with integrity, which again, they should be doing because they're election authorities. But if there are, errors, or if there is a concern, I think, Ami has, said the hotline number several times. And I think it's imperative for people to know that outside of the election authorities, there are also other avenues where you can, reach out to people in order to get information, but also to alert folks and say, hey, something else is going on. During elections, it isn't just election authorities that are on the ground. I think the state's attorneys also have people, and the attorney general's office also has people on the ground monitoring the elections to make sure that the elections are safe, that they're being conducted with integrity, and that if there's any issues or concerns, especially let's say if there's like a polling location that's absolutely not letting anybody vote, that's being handled in a timely manner. So there are processes that are set in place in order to protect people's right to vote. But again, people got to make sure that they let folks know, and that they also reach out to folks. So if you have questions, reach out to the hotlines that are offering the support and the help, and making sure that that that's there because it is there. Those are available to us as well.
Thank you, Senator. I think, like, we've been talking about this, and the next question kind of just has been captured in our conversation here. But Tausif asks whether you all would encourage people to vote in person versus the mail-in ballot. And I know we've been talking a little bit about just like planning to vote. And so what would you say?
I'm going to answer that quickly because I have to jump off.
Yes.
I honestly, what works best for you, you should really take time to think about it, and works best for you. There are options. There's still vote by mail where we can still apply. There's early voting, and then there's voting on election day. You still have options. Just make sure that you have a vote plan set in place and that you know where you need to go and what you need to do in order to make sure that you get your vote counted. But again, it's up to you, and it's up to what you most feel comfortable with. So with that, bye guys. It was great talking to everybody.
Thank you so much, Senator.
All right.
And perfect. I think perfect in terms of where we are. We're probably going to ask just a few more questions of our panelists, and again, we deeply appreciate Senator Villanueva joining us tonight. But just again, we just have just a few more questions that we can get through, and then we are coming to a close. But one thing I think that we've talked a little bit about, but more so happening in terms of at the national level, is that, I think it's important to understand the processes, and it's important to understand what's at stake. But one question is that why has vote by mail been so controversial? Why has it been talked about at the national level like it is controversial? And so just kind of I know we've been speaking about it here, but let want to speak truth to power here. I don't know if you guys want to answer. One of you wants to take a stake at that.
I'll keep this response simple. Vote by mail is not a new concept.
Mm-hmm.
We're just in a moment where it's just being expanded. There are states, one state in specific, who has universal vote by mail,
mm-hmm.
and they have some of the largest turnouts, voter turnout every single election cycle. I would go ahead and add, for everyone who's living overseas, all U.S. citizens who are living outside of the U.S. have been voting by mail for decades.
Right.
It's just this became this partisan issue with vote by mail, and we can't get too much of we want to maintain the C3, the nonpartisan aspect.
Right.
The difference is we have a group of people that believe that COVID-19 is a hoax,
mm-hmm.
and a group of people that does not. And then this became this partisan issue of who this will impact. Well, guess what? All voters have access to vote by mail in certain
mm-hmm.
states. And we believe that, all voters should have the same access, same opportunities to vote. And if vote by mail is an option, I believe that people who need to vote by mail should take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
And not one side of voters, all voters should.
Yes.
So all of this misinformation about vote by mail, try to kind of, one day call it vote by mail, one they call it absentee. It's all just to confuse the voters, suppress the vote. There are many options to vote. This was mentioned over and over again, and I believe that voters should just spend some time, think about your vote plan, and do what's best for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Bass. I mean, I think it's there's again, we talked about earlier the misconceptions, right? I know with the absentee ballot and vote by mail, I mean, we're talking about this is not a new concept. This is something that has, probably dates back closely post Civil War, and so we are dealing here with a lot of false information, and I think all of you have been reiterating the point of, get the facts and then work with that accordingly, and plan to vote in whatever way you're comfortable doing so. Any tool is better than no tool. And so, or any way is better than no way. So this is great. I think this about wraps it up in terms of our Q&A. I just want to, thank you both, and I know the senator had to leave, but I want to thank you both for taking the time to be able to jump on and have such a crucial conversation as we're, I think, 34 days from election day, which is crazy. But then in terms of Walid, can you go to the next slide, please? First and foremost, I think we want to thank again, do a quick shout out again to our partners alongside with the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, obviously folks with Besson with ICER, alongside with CARE Chicago, the Chicago Lawyers Committee, of course, for civil rights, the MUSA, and then also the MSA at U of C. And so thank you all. Next slide, Willie, please. Oh, great. So then we also have a tremendous amount of resources that that we will be sharing with all of those who have registered here. Again, you'll have access to these resources if you need help or you would like some help with respect to the conversations or some of the topics that we had today. You will be able to access that, and it will be at your disposal post this recording, and obviously alongside this recording will be on YouTube and on Facebook. Next slide, William. Ami, I'd love for you to share this information.
Again, we welcome anyone to call us at 866-OUR-VOTE or at our companion lines for community members who feel more comfortable in languages other than English. And I want to break down a little bit about what we're doing here. So we have a team of folks based with Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, not just our staff, but a huge team of pro bono attorneys who will be answering calls live on November 3rd from Illinois and Indiana. We're answering all those calls. Until November 3rd, we work very closely with our colleagues at National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, who answers these calls until then. So don't be alarmed if you get a voicemail because you're calling in September or October and you get voicemail and you may get, if you get voicemail, you'll get called back very soon. And it would be one of our national colleagues who is assisting. Just rest assured that we're talking with those national folks every day so that we can give them Illinois relevant information and insights about what's happening on the ground here and how to best answer voters' questions. And we save the information in a confidential database that helps us best answer voters' questions, and so that we can see how the issue was resolved. And so when you call, you're not going to some random call center with someone who has no idea about what's actually happening with the state of elections in Illinois. This is us, and we're really happy to help anyone with their questions, big or small. We get a lot of very simple questions. It doesn't have to be something that rises to the level of necessarily racial discrimination or intimidation. We get questions like that too, but if someone's trying to look up their polling place, something simple, don't hesitate to call us about whatever question you may have.
Mm-hmm. And again, we will be sharing, those are, Ami, thank you so much for sharing that. We will be sharing, again, this presentation. Do take note of the different languages that are available for folks that may need support in the preferred language. And so we will be sharing this post this conversation. Can we go to the next slide, Willie, please? Bassem, I'd love for you to share this. I know also ICER has some tremendous resources.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like I want to conclude with this, this is not a traditional year. 2020 is the year of the unknown. Mm-hmm. We started off with a pandemic, then an uprising for the movement for Black lives, from communities demanding, community control of the police, to here we are with, I could categorize this as one of the most important elections of my life, where so much is at stake. But also, we recognize that voting is not all that we could do. It's not everything, right? So, what I tell voters is voting is the least we could do to be involved. Democracy could only work when we're all involved. Not when one part of the community or one part of the population, when we're all involved, democracy could only work. So please, 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 if you want to receive some updates, text VR 2020 to 52886. You will get, a link to pledge to vote. In that link, there is resources on how to request your ballot if you have not requested it yet. In that link, you could also actually register to vote or update your voter registration. And then we will make sure that we send you all the reminders via text between now and election day. So for the next 34 days to keep you up to date. So once again, The keyword is VR 2020, no spaces, to 52886. Vote, organize, vote. So after we vote, we're gonna get back to work, y'all. Thank you so much, Yusuf. Thanks, Ami, the panelists, and everyone who worked on this amazing event. Thanks, everyone.
No, thank you so much, Bassem. And again, please do reach out to that number. There's so much to be done, and we're really excited to see such great partners doing this work. And so again, do take note of VR 2020 at 52886. The other thing as well is that CARE also has some resources with respect to vote, and there's also a text an option to be able to get some of that information. And so you can also text USPS at 50409 if you are, again, in need of some help with respect to registering to vote and if you're voting by mail. Then finally, can you go to the next slide, Willie, please? Finally, of course, at the coalition, and I'm sure also with folks at ICER, we've been doing some tremendous work around making sure that we are doing our part. Like Bassem said, everybody is included, whether you have status or no status, whether you are an immigrant or you were born here, despite of what community you're from, you are needed today. And so this all takes part with taking action. And so do please join us. We do have, in terms of the coalition, we have 4 phone banks going on per week on Mondays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So again, we're always looking for folks. If you have not yet joined us, there's still time, 34 days. We got this. We gotta get involved. And so please do join us. And we will be sharing that. And again, also ICER has some tremendous work doing on the phones as well. And so we have to make sure all of us are doing our part. With respect to the next piece here is that I think we talked about this a little bit. If you are interested in becoming an election judge, do inquire about it now. And we will be sharing these resources, but this with respect to folks in the respective counties, you can access more information and look to apply online. There is a process, there are some requirements, but again, please do look into it if you're looking to become an election judge, of course, in this upcoming election. And then, Willie, can you go to the next slide? And again, I think as Bassem mentioned it and really ended us quick and great and a strong, powerful point here at the end of this conversation, Ami, Bassem, with also Senator Selena Villanueva. Thank you guys again for joining us, and to our audience, thank you guys for joining us again. We're extremely excited, but also there's a lot of work to be done. And so I appreciate you and all the work that you all are doing. It's some tremendous needed work. And I know collectively we'll be able to get a win, hopefully for our communities, and make sure that we're empowering them in the way that we continue to do so. So thank you again. Again, this will be shared post this conversation, but we appreciate you all for tuning in.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.